Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Barlow, and in this video, I'll be giving my real thoughts and opinions on the Persona 5 Confidant characters. But first, I want to go over a few things. I won't be taking into account how good their Confidant abilities may or may not be, just their character's personality and story. For example, Uya's ability, being almost completely useless, will have no relevance to how she is ranked. The placement in the tier itself is ranked, and this should go without saying, but this is just my opinion. Let's start it off with Ryuji. I think he's great. I like his personality and overall character, especially during the Kamoshida arc. And he doesn't drop off during the rest of the main story, which is something a few of the other Phantom Thieves do. I like his dynamic with Joker. Joker is a largely silent and emotionless main protagonist, while Ryuji is hot-headed, loudmouthed, and prone to making rash decisions. His backstory with Kamoshida and his home life perfectly explains his behavior. He used to be a starter athlete on the track team, until that was taken away from him, causing him to be bitter and lash out at others. However, despite all that he's been through, he is still caring and loyal to those around him, even putting himself at risk to help them. For example, him going back into Kamoshida's palace in hopes of helping the volleyball team, jumping in front of a taxi in order to chase after Makoto, or when he almost sacrifices himself while escaping Shido's collapsing palace. His Confidant story also focuses on this, as it's mostly about him trying to make things right with the track team. I felt that his Confidant was weak. I liked the theme, but the story itself wasn't that interesting to me. Persona 5 has fantastic voice acting, and in my opinion, Ryuji's was one of the best. His awakening gives me goosebumps. The way he yells out, "Stop looking down at me with that stupid smile on your face," was a turning point for me in the game. Max Mittelman did a phenomenal job. Besides that, Ryuji's actual Confidant story was decent, but personally, I never really cared for it. However, his overall character, main story contributions, and the side scenes like his Valentine and his school scene festivals are some of my favorites in the game. For me, Ryuji is low S tier. Next up, Morgana. Morgana made a strong initial impression. He was sassy, funny, had a great voice, and clearly knew more than he was letting on, giving him an air of mystery. Was he the one who sold you out? Does he have his own agenda? What was his connection to the metaverse? However, as the game progresses, he becomes less funny, less interesting, and frankly, more annoying. His sassiness got old after a while, and the Lady On stuff got old real quick. He has deep-seated identity and self-esteem issues, stemming from having lost his memory and believing that he lost his human form. He tries his hardest to hide his insecurities from the rest of the Phantom Thieves, often by projecting them onto the other members, or by using his knowledge of the metaverse to look down on them, mainly targeting Ryuji. Morgana in the first few palaces is the main brain in the group, having by far the most experience in the metaverse, teaching the others how to battle and how things work such as shadows, cognition, and personas. As the Phantom Thieves gain more members and more experience in the metaverse, his expertise becomes less and less important, especially as people come along and do his old jobs better than he did, such as Makoto being an analyst and Futaba being the navigator. These changes, along with his memory loss, nightmares, self-doubt, and occasional bickering, make his insecurities worse, to the point where he leaves the group after they can't agree on what to do next. This is a nice segue to the fit he had during the Okumura arc. I've seen a lot of people complain about this being one of the worst parts of the game, and I can see where they're coming from. It's tedious, and a lot of people don't find Morgana to be that sympathetic in this situation, myself included. However, I feel that it was adequately built up to throughout the game. His nightmares and self-esteem issues weren't thrown at the last second. My issue is that at this point in the game, I lost a lot of interest I had in Morgana as a character, and it felt like it took forever. I believe he suffers a lot from his Confidant rank-ups being tied to the main story. I would like to speak with him more and ask him more questions directly. Maybe pressure him into being honest about his feelings and his nightmares. I think it would greatly improve Morgana as a character if done right. Morgana's voice fits his character perfectly. Cassandra Lee Morris really did a great job. Placing Morgana is difficult for me. For a long time, he was my least favorite character in the game. However, as I've replayed the game more and seen what others have said about him, I've grown to like his character more overall. With all that being said, for me, Morgana is mid to low B tier. Next up, An. I love An in the first arc. In fact, Kamoshida arc An is probably my favorite character in the game. Her story of going from a seemingly helpless victim of Kamoshida to someone ready to fight back against her abuser, seeking vengeance and justice, is amazing. It's one of, if not the best stories in the game. I feel that it's best summarized during her awakening, when she channels her anger and experience with sexual harassment as motivation to never let anyone else suffer the way she and Shiho did. Unfortunately, she falls off a bit more as characters, mainly Makoto and Futaba, are introduced into the Phantom Thieves. An suffers from what is, in my opinion, the weakest confidant story of any Phantom Thief. It consists of her coming to terms with Shiho's suicide attempt and wanting to improve herself using her as motivation. It makes me more interested in Shiho and not An, and then has a boring feud with another model and a boring ending. However, the roof scene with her and Shiho is excellent. In fact, it makes me tear up a bit. Like I said at the beginning, Kamoshida arc An is my favorite character in the game. Unfortunately, she has a weak confidant and slowly falls off throughout the rest of the main story. However, her amazing start and occasional bright spots throughout the rest of the game is more than enough to put her in mid-A tier. Also, Erika Harlacher did a great job. She really captures An's bubbly personality and the emotions that she goes through. Next up, Sojiro. Sojiro is Joker's legal guardian during his probation, and is the owner of Café Leblon. As I mentioned in the previous tier list video, he is my favorite character in the game. Sojiro starts off as a cold but still caring man. He slowly opens up to Joker throughout the main and his confidant story. Sojiro's confidant starts with him and Joker making a deal, where in exchange for Joker helping around the shop, Sojiro will teach him how to make coffee. Eventually, a man shows up and harasses him. Sojiro later tells Joker that the man was a former acquaintance and hoping to extort money from him. He also reveals that his curry recipe was developed by a scientist who he was close to. After this, both in his confidant and the main story, his character really becomes linked with Futaba, to the point where you can't really talk about one without talking about the other, and for this reason, I'll be going into the rest of Sojiro when talking about Futaba. Futaba starts off as a severely depressed shut-in who rarely if ever leaves her room. She also happens to be an immensely talented hacking prodigy. The story surrounding her backstory and her palace is my favorite part of the game. Throughout Futaba's palace arc, you learn a lot about her, including the cause of her depression and the relationship between her, her mother, and Sojiro. Futaba's confidant consists of her writing a to-do list like she used to with her mother, and completing the tasks on it with the help of Joker. Later on, Futaba reveals that she had a friend who she had a falling out with, named Kana. Using her hacking skills, Futaba finds out Kana is being exploited by her parents. This leads to a Mementos quest, where their hearts are changed. After this, Futaba and Kana reconcile and become friends once again. The last half of Sojiro's confidant focuses on the man harassing him and Sojiro's relationship with Futaba. This man is revealed to be Futaba's uncle, and after an altercation, the Phantom Thieves go to Mementos to change the uncle's heart. Futaba and Sojiro are my favorite characters in the game. It's clear they both suffered greatly after Wakaba's death, with Futaba's life being ruined by it and Sojiro adopting Futaba out of guilt. They are involved in some of my favorite scenes in the game, including breaking into Sojiro's house, Futaba's awakening, when Sojiro discovers Futaba's calling card and learns the truth about the Phantom Thieves, and many scenes from both of their confidants. Sojiro has my favorite character development in the game, starting off cold and distant with hints of kindness, and eventually turning into an ally of the Phantom Thieves and a father figure towards Joker. Both are top S tier. I prefer Sojiro slightly because of the more slow-paced character development versus Futaba's abrupt change of heart. Also, both Jameson Price and Erika Lindbeck did a phenomenal job in their roles. Up next, Takami. Takami is introduced as being a shady back-alley doctor who prescribes her patients with, quote, barely legal drugs. Joker and Morgana hear about these rumors and seek her out to get drugs to use in the metaverse. They come to an agreement where Joker will be the guinea pig for Takami's clinical trials in exchange for her allowing him to purchase drugs. Her confidant revolves around her clinical trials, showing off her talents as a doctor and learning about her past. This eventually leads to a Mementos quest where the Phantom Thieves change a former colleague's heart to clear her name. Takami is a solid character. She's a brilliant doctor who lost all confidence in her abilities. Her story is good and her background is interesting. She also has some fairly funny dialogue. None of her scenes are particularly memorable, and the ending to her confidant is kind of disappointing. For me, she's high B tier. Up next, Mishima. Mishima is yet another victim of Kamoshida's abuses, as well as bullying from other students. This has resulted in him being a scared outcast and looking for a purpose in life. Mishima is the first character in the game to realize that Joker is a Phantom Thief. He becomes a massive fan of the Phantom Thieves and wishes to help them change the world. He sets up the Phantom Aficionado website, or the fan site, where people can anonymously vote in polls and suggest targets for the Phantom Thieves. Most of Mishima's story is him doing his best to help out the Phantom Thieves while occasionally dealing with an old bully. However, his self-appointed position as the PR of the Phantom Thieves eventually goes to his head, and he starts to believe that he is the only reason why they are successful and popular. This ends with the Phantom Thieves heading down into Mementos to change his heart, but before the battle can take place, Joker leaves telling Shadow Mishima to change it himself. Overall, I think Mishima is a mixed bag. Him changing his own heart is one of the better character developments in the game. However, he is also kind of boring and occasionally annoying. He wishes to make some kind of impact on the world, yet lacks the ability to do so, something I feel a lot of people can relate to. Mishima is quietly one of the most important characters in the game, with his fan site playing a key role at multiple points during the story. For me, Mishima is low B tier. Next up, Igor. Igor is barely a character. He's a plot device, so it's kind of hard for me to rank him. Persona 5 was my first Persona, so I didn't pick up on the obvious differences in his character that series veterans would have. However, I still saw the reveal coming, mostly due to the dialogue with the twins. The air of mystery surrounding him was good, however his reveal was weak, and the all-powerful god being the true villain felt boring and rushed. This brings down Igor a lot in my opinion. He also suffers from the same Confidant pacing as Morgana, but to an even larger extent. And honestly, the overall story in Persona 5 really falls off at the end, and I'm putting the blame on Igor as a character. For me, he is C tier. Next up, Caroline and Justine. They are my ideal mix of being entertaining while still having an interesting story. Their dynamic with each other and Joker is great. Their story is great and is filled with excellent foreshadowing. Their interactions with Joker are my favorite in the game. Whenever they're on screen, they are great, and I really look forward to bringing them out into the real world in Royal. Lavenza is around for less than 3 hours of actual gameplay, and this does bring down their ranking for me. Now, I love the scene when they fuse and their overall character development is fantastic, but I can't help but miss the twins whenever Lavenza is on screen. Carrie Karanin did a fantastic job with all 3 voices. The twins are an easy S tier for me. Up next, Yusuke. Yusuke is an eccentric artist who attends Kosei High, and is under the tutelage of famed artist Madarame. Throughout the Madarame arc, you learn a lot about Yusuke, including his past, his relationship with Madarame, his mother, and why art is so important to him. Yusuke's Confidant focuses on him trying to get out of an art slump following the events of Madarame's palace. His story touches on many topics despite on the surface being very one-dimensional, while having many comedic moments that I enjoyed. The scenes in the church and on the boat are some of my favorites. I really like Yusuke. His Confidant is funny while still having great storytelling. My biggest complaint with him is that after Madarame's palace, he is rarely relevant to the main story and most of the time is an afterthought. Besides that, he is definitely interesting, to say the least. Matt Mercer did a great job, as usual. For me, Yusuke is mid-A tier. Next up, Uya. Uya is a tabloid journalist and paparazzi. She is introduced during Madarame's arc, where she is seen stalking around his house looking for information about him, just like the Phantom Thieves. She isn't relevant again until the next arc, where she gives Joker the name of the mafia boss terrorizing Shibuya, something that the Phantom Thieves never would have figured out by themselves. Throughout her Confidant, you get some of her backstory, including the reason why she is a paparazzi, and the reason she is stressed and depressed to the point of alcoholism. Uya is a character that gets a lot of hate from the community. The most common things people bring up when discussing why they don't like her seem to be the fact that her Confidant ability is bad, her alcoholism, and her design. First up, her ability is bad, but it is irrelevant for this list. Second up, people don't seem to understand what addiction is. She isn't an alcoholic because she wants to be. Addiction almost always stems from some sort of trauma or other mental health issues. Third up, design is simply a matter of taste. Personally, I don't think much of her design for better or for worse. Now, I know most of these people are memeing, but I still think it's worth addressing. Overall, I think Uya is decent. Her story is solid, and I really like its connection to the main story. Lala-chan is great too. As far as negatives go, I think her story takes too long to get going. The first 4 to 5 rank-ups aren't really too interesting to me. She also failed to make a strong initial impression on me, unlike nearly every other character in the game who start off great. When she was first introduced during the Madarame arc, it felt out of place, and in my first playthrough, I forgot she existed. With all that being said, Uya is underappreciated. For me, she's low B tier. Next up, Yoshida. Yoshida is a politician who gives speeches outside of Shibuya Station. His Confidant story is about him trying to get elected to office, while calling for numerous social and political reforms. Throughout his story, you learn more and more about his past, like the fact that he's a very controversial figure in politics, having been involved in a major scandal that destroyed his career and reputation. Yoshida's story is solid, however it lacked an emotional high point for me that most others had. At its core, his story is one of someone looking for redemption and wanting to bring change to the world. Joker and Yoshida's dynamic is great. Joker serves as his beacon of hope and backbone at multiple points during his Confidant. For me, Yoshida is low A tier. Next up, Kawakami. Kawakami is Joker's homeroom teacher, who has a part-time job as a maid. In her first few scenes, she, like most characters, treats Joker quite coldly. However, to me, there was an underlying feeling of kindness and empathy that stuck out, to me at least. After a great scene where Joker, Ryuji, and Mishima call in the maid service, Kawakami arrives, and she recognizes Joker. The other two left out of fear before she arrived, and in order to keep Kawakami's part-time job a secret, they later make a deal where she will let Joker skip class in exchange for his silence. Kawakami's Confidant focuses on her being lonely, stressed, and overworked, and the reason why she works part-time as a maid in the first place. Her story is interesting and actually quite dark. Overall, I think Kawakami is a great character. The teacher moonlighting as a maid is a funny gag, her story is good, and her scenes in the early game do a decent job of setting up her Confidant without revealing too much. For me, Kawakami is low A tier. Next up, Makoto. I think she's great. I like her personality and her overall character, especially during the Kaneshiro arc. Her character focuses on her gaining independence from the adults in her life who she was previously subservient to. She is a glorified tool for the principal, as shown when he tells her to find the identity of the Phantom Thieves. She also feels inadequate in comparison to her extremely intelligent sister, Sei. Her story of going from the biggest threat to the Phantom Thieves at that point in the game to eventually joining them is excellent. It's almost on the level of Ann's for me. Her Confidant story is a mixed bag. It starts with her and Joker hanging out, where you learn, among other things, that her father was a police officer who helped clean up a part of Tokyo called Shinjuku, which was a sleazy red light district with many criminal gangs. Unfortunately, he was killed by one of these gangs. It then turns into Makoto and Joker trying to help her friend escape a relationship with a nightclub host from Shinjuku. I think the story itself is a bit bland, but I really liked how she is helping a would-be victim in Shinjuku, just like her father did. I also think her helping this girl is her way of trying to repent for her lack of action against Kamoshida. Makoto has a lot of small details about her character that I like. For example, her fear of the dark, her love of action movies, and her general tomboyness. This gives Makoto some human qualities that she would otherwise lack. Also, her stalking Joker during the Madarame arc is amazing. It's a really great detail that made me like her even more. As far as negatives go, she's a little bit too smart. She is rarely, if ever, wrong, and her plans always seem to work, which feels like a bit of a crutch for the writers. Her flaws aren't really explored. For example, it's implied that she has anger issues and is socially inept. However, these flaws rarely come up, and when they do, they're used more for comedy. Now, these flaws definitely exist, but I think they should have been fleshed out further. It would have made her more relatable. Makoto is high A tier. Only left out of S because her Confidant story is a little bit underwhelming, her galaxy brain being slightly too big, and underutilized aspects of her character. I love Tromeli's voice too. Next up, Iwa. Iway? Iowa? I don't know. Iwai is the owner of an airsoft store called Untouchable. He is first introduced during the Kamoshida arc, when Joker and Ryuji go to get model guns for use in the metaverse. During a scene where Iowa is harassed by the police, Joker is secretly given a model gun that was modified to look as real as possible. After building up the confidence to ask him about it, Joker and Aiwa make a deal, where in exchange for him helping around the shop, Joker will be allowed to modify model guns. Aiwa's Confidant is about his job as a store owner and his past, as he is a former Yakuza member, and how this affects him and his relationship with his son. Eventually, the Phantom Thieves are forced to deal with a former colleague of Aiwa in order to help him and his son get out of trouble. His story ends with his son learning the truth about his past. Aiwa's story is fantastic. My only complaint is that I wish there was more of it. For me, Aiwa is high A tier. Up next, Hifumi. Hifumi's character revolves around her wanting to become a professional shogi player, just like her father was. Eventually, it's revealed that her controlling mother has been fixing her matches, among other things, so she can become famous. Her mother wants to live vicariously through Hifumi's fame. The Phantom Thieves trigger a change of heart in Hifumi's mom, who tells her everything and stops fixing her matches. Hifumi goes on to lose her next match decisively. However, she takes the loss well and uses it as fuel to become even better. Hifumi's story is good, however for me it was uninteresting. I do enjoy the interactions between her and Joker, and how she slowly becomes less shy and awkward around him, but for me her story was just really one-dimensional and boring. Hifumi is low B tier. Next, Chiyaha. Chiyaha is a fortune teller who runs a stand in Shinjuku. It's rumored that her fortunes always come true. The first interaction with Chiyaha starts with Joker receiving a reading, where he is told that he will get 5,000 yen when he returns home, and that his future is going down a path towards ruin, and if he continues going down this path, it will lead to his death. She offers him a holy stone that she claims will probably help him avoid this fate. The holy stone also happens to cost 100,000 yen. Joker decides it's not worth spending that much money on something like this, but when he arrives back at the cafe, the money fortune comes true, causing him and Morgana to reconsider the stone. Chihaya's Confidant actually begins when Joker returns and sees her dealing with a troubled customer. After her fortune reads that her customer's fate is unavoidable, Joker challenges this and changes the heart of the customer's abusive boyfriend, thus proving to Chiha that fate is not absolute. Chihaya started off great, however I think her story falls off a cliff. Every rank up she got less and less interesting to me. No scenes stick out to me as memorable, besides the initial meeting. For me, Chiha is C tier. Next up, Haru. I like Haru a lot. Her personality and Confidant are great, and her overall story is pretty good. Unfortunately, she has a few major issues that hold her back. Her late join time is her biggest flaw. Combine that with the Okumura arc being the weakest in the game, and her first impression is also weak, in fact, the weakest of any Phantom Thief. She's also completely irrelevant to the main story after the Okumura arc. Her Confidant is about her trying to overcome her shyness, the fallout of her father's death, and how this will affect the company. You learn more about Haru as she opens up more to Joker. She expresses her desire to own her own cafe with fresh and homegrown ingredients. She also hopes to increase the quality of produce in her company. Her Confidant is excellent. It has a great mix of comedy and character development. My favorite scene from it is the elephant poop coffee. Overall, I really like Haru. Her Confidant path is one of my favorites in the game, and her Memento's dialogue is fantastic. At first, I didn't like Haru's voice. It sounded so stereotypically anime to me that it honestly made me laugh. However, it quickly grew on me, to the point where I don't believe that there's a voice in this game that better matches the character. Santhe Huyn did a great job. Haru is top of A tier for me. She would easily be S if she was around longer, if the Okumura arc was better, and she didn't feel irrelevant during the rest of the story. Next up, Shinya. Shinya is a schoolboy who is called the King in an arcade he frequents due to his skill at a game called Gunabout. His story starts when Joker needs advanced firearms training in order to deal with a target in Mementos. So like any rational human being, he goes to an arcade to learn from a kid and not a former Yakuza member who is clearly knowledgeable about firearms. Shinya's Confidant focuses on his school life and his relationship with his mother. he also idolizes the Phantom Thieves. Shinya is very similar to Mishima. They are both victims of bullying and find solace in the Phantom Thieves. They both let what power they do have go to their heads, Mishima with his fan sight and Shinya with his skills in Gunabout. I like his dynamic with Joker, but his story is just bland. He is easily the least memorable and one of the least interesting characters in the game. Shinya is C tier. Next up, Sai. Sai is the older sister and legal guardian of Makoto. She is an intelligent woman who works as a prosecutor. Sai's confidant is similar to Igor's and Morgana's. It ranks up at certain points during the main story. Her confidant story is her interrogation of Joker, with her slowly coming to the realization that he is telling her the truth. During her confidant scenes, there isn't a lot learned about her. However, there are many scenes and a palace where you do. The scenes where she threatens Sojiro during the Futaba Palace arc shows her ruthless and vindictive side. In the scenes where she and Akechi talk about the mental shutdowns and changes of hearts, she becomes increasingly aggressive and obsessed with solving them to the point where even Akechi shows concern. Then there are the scenes with Makoto. Sai is strict, and at times verbally abusive. All of these lead up to her palace and her shadow. Because of her father's death, she became the sole provider for Makoto. This, plus the stress of her work, caused her to believe that the concept of justice is meaningless, and courtroom battles are just games to be won, regardless if the accused are innocent or not. Her palace is a casino where the house cheats to win. This implies that she may be rigging court cases just to come out on top. After the events of her palace and the revelations of the interview, she becomes an ally to the Phantom Thieves. At the end of the game, she prosecutes Shido and gets Joker out of juvie. After this, she becomes a defense attorney, believing that it would be a better way to fight for justice. Overall, Sai is a great character, and my favorite antagonist in the game. I only have two complaints. First, being her confidant. I don't like how it jumps up from 6 to 10 during one conversation. I would like the true ending to be unlocked at 7, and have 3 more rank ups with her. Speaking with Sai post-interrogation would have been very interesting to me. Now, I understand that they may not have wanted Joker to speak with her for storyline reasons, but he's already walking around Tokyo with just a hood up. I don't see why 3 conversations with her would be that big of a deal. Then there's an even smaller complaint. The relationship between Makoto and Sei. Now, I know Sai apologized during the big scene in LeBlanc after Joker's return, but for me, it isn't enough. I would like to see a scene where they truly reconcile. For me, Sai is low A tier. Last, but certainly not least, Akechi. Akechi is an intelligent and polite high school detective, who also happens to be the true culprit. He is first introduced to the Phantom Thieves during a scene where they all meet in a hallway at a television studio, where he lets the infamous pancake line slip. Right away I had Akechi pinned as the traitor. At this point it was heavily implied that in order to hear Morgana speak in the real world, you would have to first hear him in the metaverse. And with Monorame breaking up the Black Mask, I knew that Akechi was probably the Black Mask, or at least knew who they were. Throughout the game, Joker and the rest of the Phantom Thieves have many interactions with Akechi, during which Akechi is very polite, yet there is a degree of cockiness in how he speaks. Akechi's manipulation is excellent, and is by far the best part of his character. Whether it's the media, Shido, or the Phantom Thieves, it's great. I love the scene where he confronts everyone during the school festival. It was the first time in a long time that I felt powerless in the game. I like how similar he is to the rest of the Phantom Thieves, someone who is a victim of people in a position of power. Akechi serves as a warning of what any one of the Phantom Thieves could have turned into given different circumstances. There's a plethora of scenes and dialogue with Akechi that I like, with my favorites being the scene where he confronts the Phantom Thieves in the Access Way after Kanashiro's palace, the one where Mejid first declares war. That was the scene that cemented Akechi as the main antagonist in the game to me. He definitely knew more than he was letting off. Then there's a dialogue when he visits LeBlanc as a customer, where he opens up to Joker a bit and you learn more about his past. Finally, there's the assassination of Joker in the interrogation room, which is excellent, and the revelation that it was a setup made it even better. I've heard some people say that his revenge fantasy is poorly written, and I can see where they're coming from. It is kinda silly. However, I think that's what they were going for. Someone as deranged as Akechi would likely believe that he is right, and his plan had no way of failing, despite him being wrong, and his plan being very flawed in many ways. Now, for me, that's where the positives end and the negatives begin, and the negatives are very negative. Akechi's finale and his boss battle. I hate it. My first reaction to hearing that Shido was Akechi's father was to legitimately laugh out loud, and the dialogue during his boss fight felt very melodramatic and contrived. In my first playthrough, it felt that it was too little too late, and after 2 more playthroughs, those feelings have only gotten stronger. Even worse than all of that is the fact that Akechi is treated as if he never existed for the rest of the game. Persona 5's final arc feels very rushed, and Akechi is the biggest victim of this. In Royal, it seems that he'll be given some kind of redemption arc or a character revamp, which is something I'm interested in, as I feel Akechi had the potential to be a great character, however, his finale just ruins it. For me, Akechi is mid-B tier. Robbie Daymond did a fantastic job as Akechi. Every line of dialogue is excellent, but I can't really stress enough how bad I think his finale is. I don't know how else to say it, but it is the worst part of the game in my opinion. Well, that was the list. I just want to say a few things before I end this video. Firstly, these are just my opinions and should be taken as such. Secondly, I don't actually think any of these characters are bad, and I can see why someone would like all of these characters, just as I can see why someone would dislike them too. For example, I really liked Makoto, but there are a lot of people who find her boring, and that's okay. I really disliked Akechi's finale, but some people may have liked it, or maybe it didn't bother them as much as it bothered me, and that's okay too. If for some reason anyone actually watches this and makes it this far, well, thank you for watching, and sleep well.